Jake Morrison sat in the corner of the passenger lounge, turning the pages of his book slowly. The paper made a soft rustling sound that seemed loud in the quiet space. Around him, other passengers talked in hushed voices, their alien languages mixing together like a strange song. The Stellar Crown was the finest passenger ship traveling between the colonies. Its walls gleamed with polished metal and soft blue lights created a calm atmosphere. Large windows showed the stars streaming past as the ship moved through hyperspace. Most passengers were wealthy traders, scholars, or tourists who could afford the expensive tickets. Jake looked different from everyone else on the ship. While the tall Altarians wore flowing robes made of shimmering fabric, Jake had on simple brown pants and a plain white shirt. The bulky Gornish passengers displayed their wealth with golden jewelry and electronic gadgets that beeped and flashed. Jake carried only a small bag and his old paper book. The book drew curious stares. Most beings in the galaxy used electronic readers that could hold thousands of books in a device smaller than Jake's hand. Paper books were rare and expensive, seen as primitive relics from less advanced worlds. Some passengers whispered and pointed when they thought Jake wasn't looking. A group of vegan scholars sat at a nearby table, their green skin and large eyes turning toward Jake often. They spoke in their native language, making soft clicking sounds with their tongues. One of them, wearing academic robes, gestured toward Jake while explaining something to his companions. They nodded and made the vegan sound that meant amusement. Jake understood their language, though he pretended not to. They were discussing human culture, calling it charmingly primitive and refreshingly simple. The main speaker explained that humans had only discovered faster-than-light travel 30 years ago, making them newcomers to galactic civilization. He described Earth as a garden world with friendly natives who were still learning basic technology. The conversation hurt, but Jake kept his face calm. He had heard similar discussions many times during his travels. Most aliens saw humans as harmless curiosities, like children playing with adult tools they didn't fully understand. A soft chime announced mealtime. Jake closed his book and walked to the service counter. The Altarian steward, whose name tag read Zixthala, looked down at him with barely hidden amusement. Altarians were naturally tall, but this one seemed to enjoy the height difference. "How may I assist you?" Zixthala asked in perfect galactic common, though their tone suggested they were doing Jake a favor. "I'd like the vegetable meal, but without the Gornish spices," Jake said politely. "My stomach can't handle them well." Zixthala's crystalline skin flickered with colors that showed mild annoyance. "Another dietary restriction. Humans are so limited in what they can consume." The steward turned to their colleague and spoke in Altarian, not knowing Jake understood every word. These primitive humans and their weak digestive systems. You'd think evolution would have made them hardier, but I suppose garden worlds don't require much adaptation. The other Altarian laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "At least they're polite about it. Better than the Gornish who demand everything be prepared exactly their way." Jake waited patiently while they prepared his meal. Other passengers in line behind him shifted restlessly, some checking their electronic devices or talking quietly among themselves. A Gornish trader named Krex pushed forward, his massive frame making the floor vibrate with each step. "Excuse me, human," Krex rumbled, his voice deep and gravelly. "You're holding up the line with your special requirements." Jake stepped aside politely. "Sorry about that." "Almost finished." Krex looked Jake up and down, then snorted with amusement. Typical human, so concerned with being nice that they forget to be efficient. He turned to address the other passengers loudly. "This is why humans will never be a major power in the galaxy. They're too soft, too accommodating. They think politeness will solve every problem." Several passengers nodded in agreement. A vegan scholar spoke up from his table. "It's actually quite endearing. Their species developed on such an easy world that they never learned real competition. They cooperate instead of competing, which is admirable but not very practical in galactic politics." Another passenger, a sleek draconian merchant, added her opinion. "I visited Earth once for business. Lovely world, very peaceful. The humans there were so eager to please and so excited to meet an alien, like children meeting their first off-world visitor." Jake accepted his meal from Zixthala with a quiet thank you and found a table near the window. As he ate, the conversations around him continued. The aliens discussed human culture with the tone people might use when talking about a favorite pet. They found humans amusing, harmless, and slightly backward. The Gornish engineer Krex was particularly vocal. Humans barely qualify as a spacefaring species, he declared to anyone who would listen. They use technology they don't fully understand, borrowed or bought from more advanced civilizations. Their ships are crude copies of Altarian designs. Their weapons are simple projectile throwers that any decent energy shield can stop. A young Altarian passenger asked, "But didn't humans fight in the Centauri border war?" Krex waved a massive hand dismissively. They were support troops, nothing more. Carried supplies and provided medical aid while the real soldiers did the fighting. Humans are pacifists by nature. Their world never taught them how to be warriors. Jake continued eating in silence, his face showing no reaction to the discussion around him. He had learned long ago that defending his species only made aliens more certain of their opinions. Better to let them think what they wanted to think. An elderly vegan scholar hobbled over to Jake's table, leaning heavily on a walking stick. "Excuse me, young human. I hope you don't mind our academic discussion. We mean no disrespect. Your species is quite fascinating from a xenobiological perspective." Jake looked up from his meal. "No offense taken. What makes us fascinating?" The scholar settled into a chair across from Jake, his large eyes bright with interest. "Your adaptability, mainly. Most species specialize during evolution. Altarians developed advanced mental abilities. Gornish became master engineers, Draconians perfected trade and negotiation. But humans seem to be average at everything rather than excellent at anything specific." "That sounds like a disadvantage," Jake said mildly. "Not at all," the scholar exclaimed. "It's remarkable. Your species can function in any environment, learn any skill, adapt to any situation. You're generalists in a galaxy of specialists. It makes you very flexible." The scholar patted Jake's shoulder in a fatherly way. "Don't let the others' comments bother you. Every species has its place in the galaxy. Humans may not be the strongest or smartest, but you have a unique charm that brings out the best in other species." Jake nodded politely and thanked the scholar for his kind words. Inside, he wondered what these well-meaning aliens would think if they knew the truth about Earth, if they understood what kind of world actually produced humans, and what that meant for everything they thought they knew about his species. But that conversation would have to wait for another time. For now, Jake finished his meal in peace, surrounded by beings who saw exactly what they expected to see. The alarm started as a low hum that most passengers ignored. Jake looked up from his book, his body tensing slightly. He had heard that sound before, though not on civilian ships. Around him, other passengers continued their conversations, assuming it was just a routine system check. Then the lights flickered, and the ship lurched violently to one side. Passengers stumbled and grabbed onto tables and chairs. Drinks spilled across the floor, and someone's electronic device skittered under a bench. The gentle hum of the engines changed to a harsh grinding noise, and the ship dropped out of hyperspace with a sensation like falling. Captain Velthar's voice came over the communication system, trying to sound calm. "Passengers, please remain in your seats. We are experiencing a minor technical difficulty, and will resume our journey shortly." Jake didn't believe it for a second. He had spent enough time on military vessels to know the difference between technical problems and hostile action. The way the ship had dropped out of hyperspace was too sudden, too violent. Someone had forced them to stop. Through the large windows, stars appeared as the hyperspace distortion faded. But among the stars were other shapes. Dark, angular ships that moved with predatory grace. Jake counted at least 5 vessels surrounding the stellar crown, their weapon ports glowing with threatening energy. Other passengers pressed against the windows, pointing and exclaiming in various languages. The vegan scholars clustered together, their large eyes wide with fear. Krex pushed past smaller passengers to get a better view, his massive frame shaking with anger. "Pirates," he rumbled. "Razak Syndicate from the look of those ships." The name sent a chill through the passenger lounge. Everyone in the galaxy had heard of the Razak Syndicate. They were not ordinary pirates who simply stole cargo and left. They dealt in living beings, selling slaves to the worst parts of the Outer Rim where laws meant nothing. Zixthala's crystalline skin had lost its usual shimmer, turning a dull gray color that meant extreme stress. "They cannot board us," the steward whispered. "The Stellar Crown has security systems, shields, emergency protocols." As if responding to those words, the ship shuddered again. The lights dimmed and emergency lighting cast everything in a red glow. Through the windows, energy beams from the pirate ship struck the Stellar Crown's shields. Each hit made the entire vessel shake. Jake remained calm, watching the attack with professional interest. The pirates knew exactly where to hit to disable the ship without destroying it. They wanted the cargo and passengers intact. This was not random piracy but a planned operation. Captain Velthar's voice returned, and this time he could not hide his fear. All passengers must report to designated safe areas immediately. This is not a drill. We are under attack by hostile forces. Panic spread through the lounge like fire. Passengers screamed and ran in different directions. Some tried to reach their rooms to gather belongings. Others rushed toward what they thought were escape pods. A few simply froze in terror, unable to move. Jake stood slowly and moved toward the center of the room away from the windows. He had seen boarding actions before. The pirates would cut through the hull in the most vulnerable spots, probably near the cargo bays and passenger areas. Anyone too close to the outer walls would be in danger. The Gornish engineer Krex was shouting orders that nobody listened to. Form groups by species. Stay together. They will try to separate us. A young Altarian asked. Why would they separate us? Krex's expression darkened. Different species bring different prices in the slave markets. Altarians are valued for their mental abilities. Draconians make good negotiators and traders. Vegans are prized as scholars and researchers. What about humans? Someone asked. Krex looked at Jake with something like pity. Humans are not worth much. Too fragile for heavy labor. Not smart enough for technical work. The pirates might just kill them to save space. Jake said nothing, but several passengers moved away from him, as if his presence might make them targets. The elderly vegan scholar who had spoken kindly to Jake earlier approached him with concern. Perhaps you should hide, the scholar suggested quietly. Find a storage room or maintenance area. The pirates might overlook you. Before Jake could respond, a new sound echoed through the ship. Metal cutting through metal. The screech of hull plating being torn apart. Sparks fell from the ceiling as the lights flickered again. They're boarding, Jake said simply. The first pirates appeared at the far end of the corridor, their weapons ready. They wore mismatched armor and carried energy rifles that hummed with deadly power. Their leader was a Razak, one of the reptilian species known for their cruelty and cunning. His scarred face and cold eyes promised violence. Nobody move, the Razak shouted in Galactic Common. Hands where we can see them. Anyone who resists will be shot. More pirates poured into the area surrounding the passengers. They were a mixed group. Razaks, rogue Gornish, even a few humans who had turned to crime. They moved with practiced efficiency, clearly experienced at this kind of operation. The pirate leader studied the crowd of passengers, his eyes calculating their worth. He pointed to different groups with his weapon. Altarians to the left, Gornish to the right, vegans in the center. As the pirates began separating the passengers, Jake remained still. He watched their movements, counted their numbers, noted their equipment and positions. Old habits from his military training took over automatically. One of the human pirates approached Jake, a scanner in his hand. What do we have here? The pirate asked with cruel amusement. Another soft colony boy who thought he was safe on a luxury liner. Jake raised his hand slowly, palms open. Just trying to get home, he said quietly. The pirate laughed and activated his scanner. Well, you picked the wrong ship for a peaceful journey. Around them, other passengers whimpered and cried as the pirates herded them into groups. Zixathala was pushed roughly toward the Altarian section, the steward's crystalline skin flickering with colors of terror. The vegan scholars huddled together, their academic robes torn and dirty. Krex tried to maintain his dignity even as pirates pointed weapons at him. You cannot do this, he declared. We are legitimate passengers on a registered vessel. There will be consequences. The Razak leader hissed with laughter. The only consequence will be the price you bring at market, engineer. Your technical knowledge will make someone very wealthy. Jake watched all of this with growing calm. His breathing slowed and his muscles relaxed. The other passengers saw this as resignation or shock. They whispered among themselves that the poor human had given up, that his peaceful nature could not handle such violence. They had no idea how wrong they were. The human pirate finished, setting up his scanner and aimed it at Jake. Let's see what we're dealing with here, he said, pressing the activation button. Jake stood perfectly still as the scanner's beam played over his body. He knew what was coming next, and part of him looked forward to it. He had grown tired of being underestimated. The scanner beeped once, then twice. Then it began to flash warning lights and emit a high-pitched alarm that made everyone in the area turn to look. The human pirate stared at the scanner's display, his expression changing from amusement to confusion to something that might have been fear. "What does it say?" the Razak leader demanded. The human pirate's voice was barely a whisper. It says to handle with extreme caution." Jake smiled for the first time since the attack began. It was not a pleasant expression. The scanner's alarm grew louder, its red warning lights flashing across Jake's face. Other pirates stopped what they were doing and turned to look. Even the terrified passengers paused in their crying to see what was happening. The human pirate holding the scanner shook the device, thinking it might be broken. The display screen showed text that scrolled continuously, but the core message remained the same. Species human. Origin, Earth. Classification, Deathworld apex predator. Recommendation, handle with extreme caution. "There must be a mistake," the pirate muttered, running the scanner over Jake again. The same warning appeared, even brighter than before. New text joined the original message. Psychological profile combat adapted. Stress response enhanced aggression. Warning. Subject capable of extreme violence when threatened. The Razak leader pushed through his crew to see the scanner display. His reptilian eyes narrowed as he read the warnings. Thakvar was tattooed across his forehead in the crude script that pirates used to mark their rank. He had been raiding ships for 20 years and had never seen a scanner react this way to any species, let alone a human. "Run it again," Thakvar ordered. The scanner operator obeyed, but the results were identical. If anything, more warning text appeared. Approach with full restraint protocols. Subject's calm behavior may indicate tactical assessment rather than submission. Recommend immediate sedation if capture is necessary. Jake remained perfectly still during all of this, his hands raised and his expression neutral. But something in his posture had changed. The other passengers noticed it without understanding what they were seeing. He stood differently now, balanced on the balls of his feet, weight distributed evenly. His eyes moved constantly, tracking each pirate's position and equipment. Thakvar had survived 2 decades of piracy by trusting his instincts and his equipment. Both were telling him the same thing now. The quiet human was dangerous. But that seemed impossible. Everyone knew humans were peaceful traders from a garden world. "Where did you get this scanner?" Thakvar asked his subordinate. "Bought it from information traders on Kepler Station," the human pirate replied. "Cost a fortune, but it has data on every known species. Military grade," they said. "Never been wrong before." Thakvar studied Jake more carefully. The human looked ordinary enough. Medium height, average build, wearing civilian clothes that showed no weapons or armor. His hands were empty, his movements slow and non-threatening, but the scanner insisted he was a deadly predator from something called a deathworld. "What is Earth?" Thakvar asked Jake directly. "My home planet," Jake answered simply. "The scanner calls it a deathworld." "What does that mean?" Jake's smile was small and cold. "It means everything there tries to kill you." The other passengers stirred uneasily. They had heard Earth described as a peaceful garden world where humans lived in harmony with nature. The elderly vegan scholar who had befriended Jake spoke up hesitantly. "But Earth is classified as a Class M garden world, suitable for most carbon-based life forms. The databases all say so." Jake turned his head slightly to look at the scholar. "What else do the databases say about Earth?" The scholar thought for a moment. "Well, they mention that it has diverse ecosystems, some weather variations, the usual range of plant and animal life." "They mention the weather variations?" Jake asked with interest. "Yes, though the reports note they can be somewhat extreme by galactic standards." Jake nodded. "Hurricanes with winds over 200 kilometers per hour, tornadoes that can destroy entire cities, blizzards that bury buildings under meters of snow, droughts that last for years, floods that reshape continents." The passengers exchanged worried glances. That did not sound like the peaceful world they had been told about. "What about the animal life?" Jake continued. "Did the databases mention any details?" Krex, the Gornish engineer, answered reluctantly. "The report said Earth has a wide variety of fauna, though some entries seemed exaggerated." "Such as?" "Predators weighing several tons, venomous creatures whose bites can kill in minutes, pack hunters that can run for days without rest." Krex paused. "But those entries were marked as possibly mythical." Jake's smile grew wider. "Which predators weigh several tons?" The silence stretched uncomfortably. None of the passengers had paid attention to such details when they researched human worlds. They had focused on trade opportunities and cultural exchanges, not dangerous wildlife. Thokvar was beginning to understand. You're saying humans evolved alongside these predators? Not alongside them, Jake corrected. We evolved to hunt them. The scanner operator dropped his device. It clattered on the floor, still flashing its warnings. Around the room, pirates began to shift nervously. They had boarded hundreds of ships and captured thousands of beings. None had ever made them feel like prey. Jake continued his explanation in the same calm voice. Humans are persistence hunters. We don't have fangs or claws or natural armor. We have something better: we never give up. We can track prey for days, weeks if necessary. We can run further and longer than almost any other creature on our planet. Zixthala, the Altarian steward, whispered, but humans are peaceful. They avoid conflict. Jake looked at the steward with something like amusement. We avoid unnecessary conflict. There's a difference. Thokvar had heard enough. His crew was getting spooked, and spooked pirates made mistakes. It doesn't matter what your planet is like, he snarled. You're one human surrounded by armed pirates. Scanner warnings won't save you. You're right, Jake agreed. Scanner warnings won't save me. Then you'll come quietly and hope someone pays your ransom? Jake's expression didn't change. I wasn't talking about me being saved. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Pirates who had been relaxed now gripped their weapons tighter. The human pirate who had been operating the scanner took several steps backward, but it was the passengers who were most disturbed. They had spent days mocking Jake, dismissing him as primitive and harmless. Now they saw something in his eyes that made them remember ancient fears, instincts buried deep in their evolutionary past that warned them about predators. Thokvar raised his weapon, pointing it directly at Jake's chest. Enough games. You're coming with us whether you cooperate or not. Actually, Jake said quietly, I don't think we're going anywhere. What makes you so confident? Jake's smile became genuinely friendly, which somehow made it even more frightening. Because 3 human dreadnoughts just dropped out of hyperspace behind your ships. Every head in the room turned toward the windows. Sure enough, massive vessels were materializing in the darkness of space. They were larger than the pirate ships, heavily armed and moving with deadly purpose toward the stellar crown. Thokvar's communication device crackled to life. A human voice, female and professionally calm, filled the room. Razak Syndicate vessels, this is Captain Lisa Park of the Human Colonial Navy. You are surrounded and outgunned. Surrender immediately or be destroyed. The pirate leader stared at Jake with dawning understanding. This was a trap, Jake nodded politely. I told you the scanner was right. You should have listened to it. Around the room, pirates began to panic. Some ran for their ships, others tried to use passengers as shields. But Jake wasn't finished talking. The scanner had one more warning you didn't read, he said conversationally. Would you like to know what it was? Nobody answered, but Jake told them anyway. It said that when humans are threatened, they don't just fight back. They hunt down everyone responsible and make sure it never happens again. Jake remained perfectly still as chaos erupted around him. Pirates shouted orders at each other while passengers screamed and tried to find cover. Through the windows, the 3 human dreadnoughts moved into attack positions, their weapons locked onto the pirate vessels. How? Thokvar demanded, his weapon still pointed at Jake. How did you know we would attack this ship? Jake's expression was calm, almost bored. Because you've been hitting luxury liners on this route for 6 months. Always the same pattern. Disable the ship, separate the passengers by species value. Take the most profitable ones to the rim markets. The Razak leader's eyes narrowed. You've been hunting us. The Colonial Navy has been hunting you, Jake corrected. I'm just the bait. Around the room, passengers stared at Jake with new understanding. The elderly vegan scholar who had befriended him looked confused and hurt. But you're just a passenger. You have a ticket, luggage, you were reading a book. Jake nodded. All true. I am a passenger and I was reading. Though the book wasn't quite what it seemed. He reached slowly into his jacket and pulled out the paper book he had been carrying. With careful movements, he opened it to reveal that the pages had been cut out to create a hiding space. Inside was a small electronic device covered with switches and displays. Tactical communication array, Jake explained to the fascinated passengers. Let me stay in contact with the Naval Task Force tracking your movements, he said to Thokvar. They've been following you for weeks, staying just out of sensor range. Krex, the Gornish engineer, studied the hidden device with professional interest. That's military hardware. Expensive, advanced. But you're just a civilian. Not exactly. Jake's demeanor shifted subtly. Where before he had seemed casual and friendly, now he carried himself with military precision. Lieutenant Colonel Jake Morrison, Human Colonial Marines. Currently on special assignment with Naval Intelligence. The transformation was remarkable. The same person who had been mocked for his primitive appearance now commanded the room simply by changing his posture and tone of voice. Even the pirates found themselves listening to him with involuntary respect. "This is impossible," Zixthala whispered. "Humans don't have military forces. They're a peaceful species." Jake turned to look at the Altarian steward. "Where did you get that idea?" "Everyone knows it. The databases, the cultural exchanges, the diplomatic reports. Human society is based on cooperation and harmony." "Human society is based on survival," Jake corrected. "Cooperation is just one of our survival strategies. When cooperation doesn't work, we try other methods." Captain Park's voice came over the communication system again. "Razak vessels, you have 30 seconds to begin surrender procedures. After that, we will consider you hostile and respond appropriately." Thokvar looked around desperately. His crew was badly outnumbered and outgunned. The human dreadnoughts could destroy his entire fleet without breaking formation, but surrendering to humans seemed like admitting defeat to a species he had always considered inferior. "Your reputation says humans are soft," he snarled at Jake. "That you negotiate instead of fight, that you always try to find peaceful solutions." "We do prefer negotiation," Jake agreed. "It's more efficient than fighting. But when someone threatens human civilians or attacks our ships, negotiation stops being an option." One of the younger pirates spoke up nervously. "Boss, maybe we should surrender. Those are military ships, not merchant vessels." Thokvar backhanded the younger pirate viciously. "We don't surrender to prey species." Jake's expression hardened. "That's your problem right there. You still think we're prey? What else could you be? Your species has only been in space for 30 years. You have no great military victories, no conquered worlds, no reputation as warriors." "You're right about the 30 years," Jake said, "but you're wrong about everything else." The passengers listened with growing unease as Jake continued. They were learning things about humanity that had never appeared in any cultural database or diplomatic report. "Humans have been fighting wars for thousands of years," Jake explained. "Not with other species, but with each other. We've developed weapons that can destroy entire planets. We've created strategies and tactics that have been tested in conflicts you can't imagine." Krex interrupted. "But Earth is peaceful now. Your species united and ended warfare." "We didn't end warfare," Jake said. "We just stopped fighting ourselves and started fighting everything else that threatened us." Through the windows, the human dreadnoughts had finished their deployment. Their weapon ports glowed with barely contained energy. Captain Park's voice returned colder than before. "Time's up. Razak vessels, power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded." Thokvar made his decision. "All units, attack pattern 7. Target the human ships." The pirate vessels opened fire, their energy weapons striking the human dreadnoughts. The attack was fierce and coordinated, using tactics that had worked against other military forces. It lasted exactly 12 seconds. The human ships didn't even seem to notice the pirate weapons. Their shields absorbed the energy beams without visible effect. Then they returned fire with precision that took Jake's breath away. Each shot was calculated to disable rather than destroy, targeting engines and weapon systems with surgical accuracy. Within moments, the pirate fleet was drifting helplessly in space, their ships crippled but intact. Jake spoke into the sudden silence. "The thing about humans is that we learn fast. Every weapon used against us gets studied, analyzed, and countered. Every tactic tried against human forces gets added to our databases." He looked directly at Thokvar. "You've been raiding ships for 20 years. How many of those ships were human?" The Razak leader thought about it. "None. Human ships travel in convoys with military escorts. Too risky to attack. And now you know why." Captain Park's voice filled the room once more. "Boarding parties are on their way. Razak personnel will surrender their weapons and submit to arrest. Any resistance will be met with appropriate force." The fight went out of Thokvar's crew. They had seen their ships disabled in seconds by an enemy they had underestimated. Several pirates dropped their weapons voluntarily. But the passengers were still processing what they had learned. The Vegan scholar approached Jake hesitantly. If humans are such capable warriors, why do you let other species think you're harmless? Jake considered the question. Several reasons. First, it prevents unnecessary conflicts. Most species leave us alone because they think we're not worth bothering. Second, it makes enemies careless when they do attack us. And third, Zixathala asked. Jake's smile was genuinely warm this time. Because we really do prefer peace. Fighting is something we're good at, not something we enjoy. We'd rather trade, explore, and learn from other species. Krek shook his massive head. But this deception, making everyone think you're primitive and weak? It's not deception, Jake said. It's just incomplete information. We never lied about our nature. We just didn't volunteer details that might have caused panic. The sound of cutting torches echoed through the ship as human Marines began boarding. Jake straightened his civilian clothes and picked up his book, carefully closing it over the hidden communication device. Besides, he added casually, now you know the truth. The question is, what are you going to do with that knowledge? The passengers looked at each other uncertainly. They had spent years thinking of humans as harmless primitives. Now they discovered that one of the galaxy's most underestimated species was actually one of its most dangerous. And Jake Morrison, the quiet man they had mocked for his simple clothes and paper book, was calmly preparing to coordinate with a military force that had just demonstrated overwhelming superiority over experienced pirates. The galaxy, they realized, was a much more interesting and dangerous place than they had imagined. Human Marines entered the passenger lounge with the quiet efficiency that Jake remembered from his active duty days. They wore combat armor that seemed to absorb light, making them look like moving shadows. Their weapons were ready but not threatening, held in positions that could respond to danger instantly but didn't point at innocent passengers. The lead Marine approached Jake with a crisp salute. Colonel Morrison, sir. Captain Park sends her compliments and asks if you require medical attention. Negative, Sergeant. Passengers have some minor injuries, but nothing serious. Jake's military bearing was now complete. Gone was any trace of the mild-mannered civilian who had been mocked by his fellow travelers. The sergeant nodded and began directing his team to secure the area. Pirates were disarmed and restrained with practiced movements. Medical personnel checked on the passengers, offering treatment for cuts and bruises received during the attack. Zixathala watched all of this with growing amazement. The coordination, the timing, the precision. This wasn't a rescue mission. This was a military operation. Jake confirmed the steward's observation. Operation Mousetrap. We've been tracking the Razak Syndicate for months, trying to predict their next target. The Stellar Crown fit their preferred pattern perfectly. You used us as bait, Krex accused, though there was more admiration than anger in his voice. We used the ship as bait, Jake corrected. The passengers were always the priority. That's why 3 dreadnoughts were assigned to 1 pirate fleet. We weren't taking any chances with civilian lives. One of the younger pirates, now secured in restraint fields, called out desperately. This isn't possible. Humans are weak. Everyone knows it. Jake walked over to the captured pirate, his expression thoughtful. What's your name? Beck Tony Beck, human name. Born in the colonies? Beck nodded reluctantly. Let me guess, Jake continued. You left human space because you thought other species would be easier targets. Figured if you couldn't make it among your own kind, you'd have better luck preying on inferior aliens. The accuracy of Jake's assessment made Beck go pale. Around the room, other passengers were beginning to understand just how carefully they had all been manipulated. The elderly Vegan scholar approached Jake with scientific curiosity overriding his earlier fear. The cultural databases, the diplomatic reports, even our academic studies of human society. Were they all wrong? Not wrong, Jake said. Just incomplete. Human culture really is based on cooperation and mutual aid. We really do prefer negotiation to violence. But those traits developed because of our environment, not in spite of it. Jake gestured for the passengers to gather around. Even the captured pirates listened with reluctant fascination. Earth isn't just dangerous because of the predators or the weather, Jake explained. It's dangerous because everything is connected. One volcanic eruption can change the climate for years. One species of insect can destroy entire forests. One disease can wipe out civilizations. So you learn to work together, Zixathala said, understanding beginning to dawn. We had to. Humans who couldn't cooperate died. Tribes that couldn't share resources starved. Nations that couldn't form alliances were conquered by their neighbors or destroyed by natural disasters. Krex was nodding slowly. But this cooperation made you soft, passive. Jake's smile was sharp. Did it? Let me ask you something. What happens when a pack of wolves threatens a human village? The humans would flee or negotiate, suggested one of the vegan scholars. Wrong, humans would organize. They'd gather weapons, coordinate their defense, and hunt down the entire pack. Not just the wolves that attacked, but every wolf in the territory that might threaten them in the future. The temperature in the room seemed to drop again. The passengers were beginning to grasp the implications of what Jake was telling them. Cooperation doesn't make humans weak, Jake continued. It makes them incredibly dangerous. Because when you threaten one human, you threaten the entire species, and they all work together to eliminate that threat. Captain Park's voice came over the communication system. Colonel Morrison, we're ready for your debrief whenever convenient. Jake activated his hidden communicator. On my way, Captain. The passengers are secure and unharmed. As Jake prepared to leave, the vegan scholar had one more question. What happens now? Now that we know the truth about humans? Jake paused at the doorway. That depends on you. You can go back to thinking of humans as harmless primitives who got lucky. You can spread panic throughout the galaxy about the dangerous deathworld species that's been hiding among you. Or you can accept that humans are what we've always been, a species that survived by adapting to any situation. Which would you prefer? Zixathala asked quietly. I'd prefer that other species judge humans by their actions, not their reputation, Jake said. We've been honest in our trade deals, faithful to our alliances, and protective of our friends. The fact that we're also capable of extreme violence when necessary shouldn't change those relationships. Krek spoke up with grudging respect. The scanner was right about you. Handle with care. The scanner was right about all humans, Jake corrected. We're products of a world that taught us to be whatever we need to be to survive. Sometimes that means being peaceful traders. Sometimes it means being diplomatic negotiators. And sometimes it means being apex predators who hunt down threats to our species. As Jake left to meet with Captain Park, the passengers were left to process what they had learned. The quiet human who had endured their mockery was actually a military officer on a dangerous mission. The primitive species they had dismissed was capable of planning and executing complex operations across interstellar distances. The harmless primitives were revealed to be persistence hunters who never gave up on their prey. Beck, the captured human pirate, spoke into the silence. I thought other species would be easy targets because humans were weak, but I was thinking like a prey animal. I never considered what it would be like to be hunted by predators who could think, plan, and cooperate. Thakvar, secured in his own restraint field, finally understood the magnitude of his miscalculation. We chose the wrong prey. No, said Zixthala, watching through the window as Jake boarded one of the human dreadnoughts. You chose the wrong predators. Later, as the Stellar Crown resumed its journey under naval escort, the passengers found themselves looking at the galaxy with different eyes. Every human trader, diplomat, or tourist they encountered would now be seen through the lens of this new knowledge. Were they all military personnel in disguise? Were they all capable of the same calm competence that Jake had displayed? Were humans secretly the most dangerous species in known space, hidden behind a facade of primitive harmlessness? The elderly vegan scholar spent the rest of the journey revising his research papers. The cultural databases would need significant updates. Academic theories about human development would require complete revision. But more than that, the entire galaxy's understanding of humanity would need to change. The species that everyone had dismissed as newcomers and primitives had just demonstrated capabilities that suggested they might be the most evolved survivors in known space. Jake Morrison had boarded the ship as a figure of amusement, mocked for his simple clothes and primitive book. He left as a reminder that appearances could be deceiving, that the galaxy's most dangerous predators were often the ones that didn't look dangerous at all. And throughout human space, other quiet individuals continued their work as traders, diplomats, and tourists, carrying with them the hidden strength of a species that had learned to survive on a world where everything tried to kill them. The scanner had been right all along. Handle with care. But the real question was whether the galaxy was ready to accept what that warning truly meant.